Hey, with your evening story channel, I post new interesting stories every day. Subscribe and click the bell to not miss it. There was a fancy foreign car on the side of the dirt road. The door and, in fact, the body of the car were splattered with mud, and the windshield looked as if a dozen rams had danced on it. Next to the car stood three young men, some of whom were not yet 20 years old. They are most often referred to as majors, for their swagger, exorbitant behavior, wastefulness, and habit of dressing with needles. All three of them were friends, James, Robert, and Charles. They had long been accustomed to the fact that they were allowed everything in life without exception. Expensive restaurants, nightclubs, and discos until morning replaced each other in a kaleidoscope of joyful events that filled their lives. A feeling of unprecedented freedom and power. Often this trio had a good time, forgetting that in the morning they were waiting for their studies at the university. And today, instead of returning home after another feast, the majors were drawn to the city. There, according to rumors, was planned a picnic at one of the rich sons of a local farmer. James, Robert, and Charles made it to the party, but they didn't make it home. On the way back, they managed to puncture two tires at once, which made their foreign car freeze like a stumbling block. Despite the fact that the car belonged to James, each of his friends considered the car his own. Seeing the punctured wheels, the owner of the foreign car dejectedly stretched out, "Yes, here without a tow truck and not do without. I don't want to tell my father or older brother about it. Again, only take out the brain and nothing more. What tow truck? I don't have much money. Maybe a couple $100. I gotta call my dad, even though we're supposed to be in class." How I'm gonna explain to him that I'm stranded on the side of the highway. He's already threatened to cancel my credit card after our last bender. And now he's gonna do it. I need to get to town, change, and then go with the tow truck to get my car. Charles objected. Robert nodded approvingly, supporting his friend's opinion, for all three of them reeked of alcohol, for they had been partying until almost dawn and were now just approaching the stage of sobering up. None of the guys had ever voted on the road before, and this activity seemed to them extremely shameful. On the other hand, there is a saying that everything happens for the first time in life, which means that sometimes the majors have to become ordinary people in an awkward situation. As luck would have it, the traffic on this section of the highway was not very busy. The chance to catch a hitchhiker for the three friends was melting away by the minute like March snow in the sun. "We won't wait for anything," Charles said irritably. "Come on, don't be in a hurry. This is not a city where shuttle buses run every 5 minutes. There's bound to be something," James objected. Robert hummed as usual and was about to step back into the shade of the trees when he saw a bus swaying round the bend. There it was. "Look, it's coming, guys, it's coming." Charles and James were ready to jump on the spot with joy in the countryside. Deprived of money and a car, the boys felt vulnerable, and they liked that feeling. They felt smaller and smaller. It wasn't until the bus pulled up alongside the voting crowd that they saw a woman in her 30s with a distinctive headscarf hiding a good half of her forehead sitting behind the wheel. "Oh, there's a young lady in charge." Climbing up the stairs, James couldn't help himself. His friends answered him with a friendly laughter. They made the passengers shudder and involuntarily squeezed into the seat. The smell of alcohol exuded. Trinity immediately filled half of the cabin, which made all present have associations with a cheap pub. Laughing merrily, joking at each other, the guys plumped into the empty seats, tossing the driver money for the fare, like a handout to a beggar change is not needed, mamash. "Keep it for cosmetics." Quite rudely, Charles added. The driver could see by the woman's face flushed with shame. The passenger's phrase struck a nerve, but she didn't respond to the barbs. She pressed the gas pedal a little, almost subconsciously. As luck would have it, there was no controller on the route today, and the driver had to combine both professions. At some point, the clamor of tipsy guys began to get on his nerves, from what the driver said to them. "Turning half-turn, guys. Can we be a little quieter?" "Well, you are not alone in the bus." The woman's phrase caused the guy's sincere bewilderment. Frankly speaking, They have long since gotten used to the fact that in their lives someone dared to cross them, come to the restaurant. So the waiter literally scattered in kindness. And if they come to a store, the salesmen are ready to carry wealthy customers in their arms. And so it happened everywhere, wherever there was a reckless trio at Major's. But they miscalculated with a driver named Clara. She was not going to yield and fawn, and therefore she did her job, as prescribed by the instructions. But the guys could not forgive such a thing. James was the first to burst into flames, shouting across the cabin, "You better watch the road. They put a monkey behind the wheel. She thinks she's a driver. Who the hell thinks that?" As if men weren't enough. Charles and Robert immediately supported their comrade with a laugh that sounded more like the laughter of jackals. Clara clenched the steering wheel painfully, but she kept her composure. She had heard the joke about the monkey with the grenade many times before, but it still sounded very hurtful and offensive from the mouths of these brats. She pressed her lips together, fixed the handkerchief on her head, and smoothly entered the corner. In another 40 minutes, she would be rid of the drunken boor who had been on her bus by blind chance. Clara had recently been assigned this road. Before that, she drove a small shuttle bus through the cramped, car-crawling streets of the city. Clara herself. She wanted a sense of freedom that only a big road called a highway could give. She had long dreamed of taking the intercity bus. Clara liked to listen to the peaceful noise of the engine, accompanied by the rustle of tires on the asphalt. At such moments, she felt herself in the bus as one, especially in the morning when a fresh breeze blew through the window, caressing the cool cheeks of the driver. At first, seeing a woman at the wheel of the vehicle, passengers were nervous, and now and then they looked warily at the road. But after a little getting used to it, they calmed down and even felt comfortable. Clara had been driving since she was 18 and could drive almost anything, from a motorcycle to a truck. However, she opened this category purely out of sporting interest, as she considered working on a dump truck to be too hard for a woman. But the bus driver vacancy caught her eye at first sight. Her friend, of course, twisted her finger at the temple, calling her obsessed. "Why do you need all this? You're a woman, the keeper of the hearth and all that. What kind of rally are you running? You drive a car, that's fine. What are you doing on a bus? You've had a kid going to first grade. Mom's sick, and you're going crazy on the roads. Stop it. You know, I've loved cars since I was a kid. My father worked on a bread truck. He taught me everything. Showed me everything. How can you not become a driver?" Clara objected. It so happened that the work on the route became for her that very outlet, helping her to cope with all the blows of fate. Clara's husband left a year after the birth of their son. It is difficult to say what exactly influenced his choice, but most likely in this case did not do without a third party, in the person of a wealthy mistress at the number of hunters for younger men. Although for many of her ex did not seem the ideal man and husband, before the divorce she thought he was exactly that. Unfortunately, too late she realized her mistake when it was impossible to correct the situation. On the other hand, in memory of the failed marriage, she had a beautiful son who became for her the meaning of life. When they'd first arrived at the bus depot, colleagues either shook their heads disappointedly or openly criticized the female driver. No one believed that Clara could handle the bus as well as the men. She had to go through a lot before she earned the respect of the team. There was everything, and bitter tears in the evenings and disappointment, bordering on outright despair. Often colleagues joked about Clara, then a boulder under the wheel, so she could not move from the place. They'd put something sticky on the driver's door handles. From a man's point of view, they were all just harmless jokes, but to Clara it seemed like something out of the ordinary. Her real respect came when she helped a driver who had been in an accident. The victim was a man. A man about her age had crashed into a tree because of an awkward maneuver. The owner of the foreign car had nothing to do with it. The blame lay on the daredevil motorcyclist, the collision with which the driver of the car tried to avoid. Of course, the man had the choice of either letting the motorcyclist crash into him, leaving the fast rider disabled for years to come, or avoiding the collision himself, choosing a tree or a pole as an unenviable alternative. The owner of the foreign car favored the second. In the collision with the obstacle, the car was severely deformed, from which the driver was pinned in the cabin. On top of that, the impact caused damage to the fuel system, which caused a fire in the hood area. Seeing this gruesome sight, Clara stopped the bus and, taking out a fire extinguisher, rushed to help. The woman acted almost on automatic, as if every day took part in similar rescue operations. It took Clara quite a bit of effort to get the man out of the cabin. Clara had to spend a lot of effort. Fortunately, her efforts were not in vain. The driver was saved. As soon as she pulled into a safe distance, there was a huge explosion caused by the fuel tank fire. A little later, an ambulance arrived, summoned by one of the passengers of the shuttle bus, left by Clara on the roadside. In the heat of fighting the fire, she herself did not notice how she received burns on her hand and face. And if the wrist and forearm could later be hidden behind long sleeves, shirt, or dress, then with the ugly scar on his forehead. It turned out to be much more complicated. Friends advised to let go of the long bangs, but Clara preferred to make do with a scarf. This way she had a good view and didn't have to fix her hair every minute. The story of the incident quickly traveled around town and made Clara a hero, for a while the only thing that upset her a little. It was that the rescue driver never bothered to find her and thank her for his rescue. No, Clara didn't want the money at all, no. Probably a bouquet of white roses, her favorite to the point of unconsciousness, would have been enough for the brave woman. Though what about roses? A bouquet of field daisies would have impressed the beautiful driver no less. Flowers they loved after cars, she considered them the #1 medicine for her tortured soul. Often wanting to lift her spirits, she would pick a bunch of daisies on the side of the dirt road and leave them in the cabin next to her seat. In a way, she considered it her amulet, a good sign. And now, trying to cope with the attacks of the majors, she kept glancing at the bouquet of daisies, as if looking to them for support. Meanwhile, James, Charles, and Robert later felt their invulnerability and began to behave even more swagger, clinging not only to the female driver, but also to the passengers. Clara couldn't take it anymore. Guys, once again I repeat, stop this nonsense. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to let you off. No way, teasing her. James, this must be your first time driving. Only backwoods dairymaids wear that kind of handkerchief, he inserted his unnecessary opinion. The ever-silent Robert, tears poured from Clara's eyes as if in mockery of her. The cabin was full of elderly people and children. That meant that they had only themselves to rely on. At that moment, all her resentments, torn down over the last few years of her life, came crashing down on Clara at once. There was everything here. Anger at her ex-husband, who had abandoned her and her son, and the banter of her colleagues, and even the attitude of some of the passengers. All this negativity mixed into one whole, turning Clara into an angry fury. Her anger at the majors literally overshadowed her mind, making her think only about righteous retribution. What about here and now? Clara stopped the bus and ripped the handkerchief off her head. Then, pointing at the door, she commanded, "Get out of here quickly. You can complain about me to your dads, or whoever. I don't care, but I'm not driving you anymore." James looked at his astonished companions, but he didn't dare to disobey the driver, especially after he saw the car fire extinguisher in Clara's hands, which she intended to use for its intended purpose, to cool the ardor in the hearts of the heated youths. Once on the side of the highway, the boys were once again downcast, and their bravado and arrogance slipped away like husks. It left a very unpleasant residue in their souls. Clara remained silent for a moment, and was about to return to the cabin when an expensive foreign car pulled up beside the bus. James' eyes literally flashed with joy. "It's my brother William." "Bro, you hear that?" His friends regained their former confidence, caused by the possibility of getting into an expensive foreign car and in a few minutes be at home. But when Brother James got out of the car, his face looked more like the stone-carved profile of an ancient Greek god. "I've told you many times not to drive drunk. I got nothing else to do. Like look for you in all the back alleys." William began. James turned pale. Not that kind of reaction. He had expected his brother to humiliate him in front of his comrades. But what happened a little later threw the Major into a state of deep shock. William looked at the bus driver and froze in place. At that moment, he remembered how a year ago he had been in a car accident and spent 3 months in a coma. After leaving the hospital, William spent a long time recovering, never knowing the name of his savior. The memory lapses that had plagued him for 6 months were partly to blame. And only now, when the older brother James William finally came to his senses, he realized the woman standing in front of him as his savior, the woman who had risked her life for him. In her eyes, Clara William guessed. She, too, recognized him and had the same feelings as the young businessman. Giving James a hard slap on the back, William began to apologize for both himself and his younger brother. At the same time, there were tears in Clara's eyes and warm words of gratitude from William's lips, and the passengers watching the scene from the side could not hold back their tears. After all, they had just witnessed a real drama with a happy ending. After the scene on the highway, James always greeted Clara when he met her, signaled and waved frantically. But William went much further and became a real fiancé for Clara. Sometimes he joked about it, saying that she, without realizing it, saved her future husband, practically giving him a second life. But that is another story.